post-election panel called What Happened regarding Manitoba's provincial election on October the 3rd. Just as a quick update to the provincial election results, the New Democratic Party, or the NDP, have 34 seats. The Progressive Conservatives, or the PCs, have 22 seats, and the Liberal Party has 1 seat. My name is Dr. Arneth McGowan-Plant, and I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's event. I would like to begin by the Traditional Territories Acknowledgement. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. On behalf of the Centre for Social Science Research and Policy at the University of Manitoba, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening. The Centre provides research advisory services and outreach to both the U of M community and to external groups and organizations. Please note that the Centre, the University of Manitoba, and the panelists do not represent any political party, member of the Legislative Assembly, or office. This is a general information presentation offered by the Centre and drawing upon the expertise of these panelists. For tonight's presentation, I would like to offer the following agenda, and I ask if you have any questions, if you could please include them in the chat, and we'll respond to those questions at the end of the evening after the participants have spoken and we have a question and answer session. So to begin for the agenda, I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. I will follow with 3 questions to each of the panelists who are going to be joining us this evening. And as well, as I said, a question and answer session later in the evening for about 10 to 15 minutes. And again, we will be asking each of the questions that are in the chat to the panelists. If you have a specific question to a panelist, please indicate who that is to, or if it's a general question, I will just ask it to the panelists at large, and I'm sure 1 or 2 will be able to respond to that. So let's begin. As I said, I would like to introduce our panelists for this evening. Dr. Christopher Adams is a regular media analyst. He's a past pollster and an adjunct professor in the political studies at the University of Manitoba. Ms. Jasmine Brar is a school trustee with the Pembina Trails School Division here in Winnipeg. She is also currently serving as the Alternate Support Staff Assessor to the Board of Governors at the University of Manitoba and has an extensive background in grassroots community activism and volunteer work. She currently serves as Vice President of the South Winnipeg Community Centre and as the President of the Prairie Pointe Neighborhood Association. Dr. Royce Coop is a professor in the Department of Political Studies, a coordinator of the Canadian Studies Program, and also an academic director with the Centre for Social Science Research and Policy at the University of Manitoba. Ms. Mary Agnes Welch is a principal with Probe Research here in Winnipeg. She joined the firm in 2016, following a career as award-winning politics and public policy journalist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Please help me to welcome these panelists to our event this evening. Now, I'd like to begin with Dr. Christopher Adams, if I may. I'm going to ask the first question in the following order, as I just said, with Dr. Adams beginning, followed by Ms. Brar, then Dr. Coop, and then with Mary Agnes Welch. So here's the first question for our panelists for this evening. Based on your predictions from the pre-election event, can you please briefly comment on the election results, as well if there were any differences in your prediction on what happened on October the 3rd? Dr. Adams, could you please start for us? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you for having me here. I'm just going to start my screen show, my slideshow. So I'm really pleased the Centre asked us back. You know, I think we had a very good panel before the election came, and we had a very vibrant discussion. We had some good questions from the audience. So thanks very much for letting me speak. And I've just got a few slides just to give an overview of what happened. The issues, you might recall, these were the issues that were discussed at the first session that we had. And we saw in the campaign that the NDP had really taken control of the agenda for healthcare, but also the PCs had hammered away at crime and security, as well as cost of living and inflation. The NDP actually had some campaign areas in that, but the healthcare, and also the other one was searching the landfill, and that's where we really saw a division between the two main parties. If Mary Agnes doesn't mind, I'm going to just show a couple of slides from her company, Probe Research. But here, when leading up to the campaign, and I'm going to have to move these, I'm just going to move things so I can see the slide myself. So you can see just in June, at the beginning of the campaign, 41%, it was a tie across the province between the two main parties. In the city of Winnipeg, and this was a slide shown in the first forum that we did before the election. In June, Probe Research, when you looked at Winnipeg itself, there was still a big gap between the two main parties, but you could see that it was narrowing. And in fact, some people were saying this campaign is going to be closed, it's a cliffhanger. We heard those sorts of terms during the summer. But when it came to the campaign, when we got into September, Pro Research quite rightly showed that the NDP was really picking up momentum. And here we see the NDP really picking up ahead of the PCs there. And also in Winnipeg, more tellingly, 57% to 28%. I think I see that. An even wider gap. And as people in the audience know, that the majority of seats in Manitoba are located in the Winnipeg region. 32 seats of the 57 seats are in Winnipeg. So to win a provincial election, you really have to win Winnipeg. And as Probe Research quietly showed in September, the gap was almost insurmountable. So what people thought was a close election when they looked at the provincial numbers, really, when you looked into the Winnipeg numbers, it was still quite a gap. And then when we got into September, into the full flight of the campaign, it was a big difference. The two things I think were critical at the beginning of the campaign in early September. One was Axworthy supporting Wab Kinew. Lloyd Axworthy said, well, I'm not endorsing Kinew. Well, if that isn't endorsing, I don't know what is. But that really, in many ways, put the hammer on the Liberals. There are other things that happened to the Liberals, unpopular Justin Trudeau and other things. But I think this really took the wind out of the sails of the Liberals to have the sort of the one of the leading figures of the Liberal Party in Manitoba actually coming out and supporting Wab Kinew. And the other thing too was Gary Doer stepping forward on 13th September in the newspaper. So it was the 12th of September. He stepped forward. He put on his usual Doer show, saying, I'm putting my skates back on. And he talked about calling the game from behind the ice and curling. But I think having Gary Doer step forward like this, we hadn't seen Gary Doer since he left to become the ambassador of the United States from Canada. We hadn't seen Gary Doer stepping forward publicly until this election. And in many ways, the criticism of Wab Kinew was, you're no Gary Doer. Well, he brought forward Gary Doer, and I think that was something that really energized the campaign. And with the polls so high for the NDP, I think the NDP was able to take a high road in its campaign. That is campaigning on promises, on healthcare, on things like this. You can see in the advertisement, the tone, as you can see, is a very elevated tone. It's not negative. It's unlike Rachel Notley's campaign against Daniel Smith. This campaign, I think largely because they had the comfort of being so high in the polls, they could take the high road in this campaign. The tone of the Progressive Conservatives was very different. And Doug McLaughlin, who some of you know, Doug McLaughlin had been the campaign director for, David McLaughlin had been the campaign director for Brian Pollster. He had made the comment that really the tone of the PCs in this campaign might affect the brand image of this party for many years to come. But as I see it, is the PCs, as things got worse and worse in this campaign, they brought out more and more of the negative campaigning strategy. And this on the right side, on the left side, you can see identified members of the caucus of the campaign of the NDP, identified as being associated with very unpalatable things. On the right side of the screen is an advertisement saying, don't worry what people are saying to you. You have the secret ballot. You can vote alone. No one will see you, and has a very dark feeling to it. People are saying, like, why would you do this? Well, there are some elections in which voters were known to have voted at the very last minute, making their decisions. One was the last Christy Clark election when she beat the NDP. The exit polls at the time were saying that people were making their decision in the ballot booth, in the voting booth, not a week beforehand. The same thing with when Redfern for the Conservatives in Alberta, when she was elected, and many people in the silence of the booth, they were voting for the Progressive Conservatives instead of the Wild Rose Party. So there are decisions made by voters on the very day in which they go in, but nevertheless there is a tone of darkness in these campaign advertisements by the PCs. The one that was really telling, and this was right around the day of reconciliation, the reconciliation week. This billboard going up, standing firm, 184 million landfill dig, really talking about that the PCs were not going to support searching for those two murdered women who we know are in that landfill. The murderer, the accused murderer, has said that that's where he buried them. So it's not guesswork. But regardless, there were many people who are very angry at this, especially during the period of reconciliation. Somebody I was speaking to was saying, these are families with murdered women, related to murdered women, and to see this as kind of a ping pong ball in an election campaign was seen as sort of beyond the pale. I would say that the PCs for quite a while will have to play this down. We've seen members of within the PC caucus and campaign disavowing them of this. Candice Bergen, Candice Bergen, for goodness sake, she was the chair of the campaign, not the campaign director. Those are different things, but the chair of the campaign. She had said that this was not part of her strategy. She did not support this move by Marnie Larkin, who is the campaign director. But if you're the campaign chair, for goodness sakes, like, don't you have any say around the table? And Heather Stephenson has recently done an interview with Bart Kivas with the CBC, and she's disavowed this. And you think, like, man, like Kelvin Gertson, who always is the voice of reason. Afterwards, he said, a victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat dies an orphan. And it seems like everybody disavowed themselves of Marnie Larkin's campaign. In our first forum, the pre-election forum, I talked about the nature of Winnipeg is the difference between where the NDP support and outside. And this is Jacques Marcoux, who used to be the data analyst for the CBC. He's now gone off, works for an NGO, but I believe, but his love of data makes him continue to generate these pictures. But this, as you can see, what I talked about before the election, we see the pattern even more so, that the ring around the city is Tory blue, and inside the city is NDP orange, with some liberals up in liberal Cindy Lamoureux's seat up in the top left corner. But this is very much, as I was saying in the first forum, that the donut is very much like what we see in other cities. That's what we see in American cities, where the Democrats are in the middle and the Republicans on the outside. So I just want to talk very briefly about 3 polls. This is something I do for all elections. I look at the polls being done in a general election to see if they're accurate. Now, of course, you should be looking as you get closer to the election day. Probe Research's poll, which was very, very good, was in September. So that's too close to the election day. But there are 3 companies that did polling that revealed their poll just on the night before the election day. And I thought I'd show you how accurate they were. Forum Research, Forum does an IVR, interactive voice response poll. And here, just looking at the NDP, the Forum poll was I have to put my reading glasses on, 44% for the NDP. Research Company, another national polling firm, they did an online poll, 48% supporting the NDP. Main Street Research did a 47% result for the NDP, and the actual election result was 45.5%. Now, so you can see, the numbers of the polling data are not radically off from the election data, the actual election results. So I would say that Forum and Main Street did a better job than Research Company, but regardless, they all the three polling companies that released something just on the final day were fairly close. So another thing on turnout, we were expecting, or I was expecting when we talked in our pre-election gathering, I was expecting turnout to be higher. There was a competitive election, we thought, and we thought there might be a turnover of government, which there was. Sometimes it brings out higher turnout, like we saw in the federal election in 2015. But as you can see, as we go from the mid-90s up to 2023, things have declined since the Filman days, but also the last election to this election, there isn't a big change. I think one thing that might have affected some of the turnout, I'm not sure, I don't have evidence, but we had a tremendous thunder lightning storm at the beginning of the election day, and that might have caused some problems, but it didn't last all day, that weather problem. So essentially we had the same amount of turnout as last year. So that's my round the world trip on this election. I look forward to hearing the other members of the panels, and I do want to thank the Centre for allowing us to be part of this panel again.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Ms. Brar, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, and pleasure to be part of this panel discussion. So I will be talking on what I got right versus what I got wrong. So I managed to predict right the most of the ridings what I mentioned in our first panel discussions, such as Southdale, Fort White, Real, Rosemere, St. Boniface, Kirkfield Park, and in the particular in my own home riding, which is Waverly. I did predict that it would flip to NDP. The only one I did not expect some of the polls to go as close as they did is in Fort Richmond. I assumed it would be PC leaning simply because they ran a well-known local community volunteer in that riding, but it was decently an eye-opener in terms of how campaigns had been running in the past. And I assumed, like everyone else on this panel, that the PCs were in for some serious trouble. But we saw an absolute rejection of the PC policies. And I did not expect it to be that many seats to flip, but I guess Manitobans have made their decision. And the reason I would say is the more, as Mr. Adams mentioned, that the negative campaigning, with the last, I would say the last 2 weeks were very, very critical, and we have seen so much negative campaigning from PCs that was happening, and that definitely did played some role in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coop.
Okay, Chris has given us all this tour de force of the election, so there's nothing left for the rest of us to say, but thanks a lot, Chris. But I'll stick to this question of the prediction that I made and how right or wrong I was. And you'll recall for a very long time before the start of the campaign, the Tories were running far behind the NDP in the polls. And then as the election got closer, things tightened up. And at the start of the campaign, things looked pretty close, at least in the province-wide polls. And so we had the possibility of an exciting election campaign where we weren't totally sure what the outcome was going to be. At the start, I think someone forced me to make a prediction, and I said, well, probably the NDP is going to win, given that they have the lead in Winnipeg. And that's what ultimately happened. And I think one of the interesting things about this campaign, and the thing that Mary Agnes and I both got right was that some of these seats were incredibly close within Manitoba. But what I personally didn't get right is that the seats that were close were not the ones that I thought were going to be. And so at the start of the campaign, I was talking about, the bellwether battleground seats, Fort Richmond, Riel, Seine River, maybe Southdale. But as the campaign went on and the NDP got more and more traction, as Chris walked us through, it became kind of clear, you kind of hate to say it in an election campaign when people are knocking on doors, but those seats were slipping away from the Tory candidates. Like it was becoming clear that they were not going to be able to hold on to those. And the battleground seats were becoming Tory seats that the Tories won with 25% margins in the last election. I'm thinking of Waverley, Lagimodiere, Assiniboia, those kinds of seats. And so that's where we saw the really close outcomes. And I'll come back to this in a second, but those are seats that the NDP was able to win with pretty small margins over PC incumbent MLAs. So the NDP did win. In the days after the election, we saw a lot of writing in our newspapers, people talking about that it was a big blowout, that the PCs had been destroyed and they'd been repudiated, and there needs to be a big rethink of what the party stands for. But I think we need to be a little bit careful with that sort of talk. When you actually compare the popular vote, the NDP got 45.5% of the vote. The PCs got 42.1%. A 3.4% difference in the popular vote does not mean that the PCs have been destroyed. So you compare that, for example, to 2016, the NDP got 26% of the vote and 14 seats. That's a blowout. That's a party that is in rough shape. And even so, even after that, it only took them 7 years. And look, they're back in power. So I think it's important. We always want to kind of create drama, create excitement when we talk about elections, but I don't think it's as bad as it was made out to be for the PCs right after the election. And even in terms of the seat share, it's more lopsided. But to return to some of the really close races that we saw in Winnipeg, 7 Winnipeg seats won by less than 1,000 votes, and some seats won by about 100 votes each. So in Lagimodiere and Waverley, the last time I checked, it was about 100 vote margin. Well, that's an organizational question. That's like the Tory or the NDP get out the vote people doing a better job getting their voters to the advanced polls better than the Tories did. So I'll leave it at that. But I think we all did pretty well in our predictions. I'm proud of the panel here.
Thanks, Dr. Koob. Ms. Welch, please.
Wasn't quite ready. Yeah, once again, Royce and Chris and Jasmine have kind of stolen my thunder a little bit as the last one to go. So I was trying to remember what my predictions were, and I was definitely wrong about lots of stuff. I remember last time I said this election will really come down to kind of micro ridings, like exactly who's got to get out the vote, who's can get those last 100 votes in whatever riding. But just as Royce said, my calibration of which ridings was quite wrong in a lot of cases. I thought Fort Richmond was going to be much closer, just like Jasmine. It wasn't really. I thought Waverley would not go NDP. It did. I thought Kirkfield Park would stay Tory because of the strength of that Liberal vote. Oh, that reminds me, one more thing I got wrong. And Kirkfield Park was a blowout for the NDP. I thought Selkirk was obviously going to go NDP. Nope. I thought Dauphin would be maybe not a little bit more of a strong NDP showing. It did go NDP, but not by 1 million votes. I think 600 or 700 votes. Brandon, then there was on election night, there was a bunch of like, whoa, that's really way closer than I thought it was going to be. Brandon West, that could have gone NDP. It was, I think it's 95 votes or something that the Tories won it by. It was weirdly close for a riding that was where the Tories had a really popular police chief in that riding, and it was tight. Heather Stephenson's own riding, that was quite unexpected. A candidate that a lot of my lefty friends knew and liked, but I had never heard of. Didn't hear one peep about that campaign. I don't think they had any kind of election day get out the vote machine at all. And so I think that one even took the NDP by surprise. And then River Heights, that one, and that was another classic, like, my friends who are less political, who live in River Heights, kept saying, well, there's a lot of Mike Moreau's signs. I'm seeing a lot of NDP signs. What's going on with that? And all my political friends were like, never going to happen. Don't even think about it. It will always be John Gerard's seat. The NDP didn't put any attention on that seat, even on election day. And of course, it was a blowout for the NDP and the Mike Moreau's. So that one, I think that's like actual voters saw that coming. I'm not sure the political class saw it coming, which is kind of fun when that happens. So those are the ones I was wrong about. I was right about some others, but those are the boring ones. It's more fun to talk about what you didn't expect. The other thing, just kind of to follow up on Royce's point about kind of really in the end, the fact that the Tory vote wasn't that low. We all talked about the implosion of the Liberal vote. And I want somebody to do a better analysis than I could do quickly on election night. But the Liberal vote didn't totally collapse. It was 9, 10, 11% in a lot of those urban ridings. I mean, setting aside the fact that they didn't run candidates in a whole bunch of places in the province. But the upshot was a collapse in their seats, of course, but the actual vote share wasn't in the single digits in a lot of ridings. So I don't want to write them off prematurely. I feel like that might be what we talk about later tonight, but it was all the chatter on election night was that how successful that NDP approach of stealing those Liberal votes really was. But I think the NDP got just as many Tory votes as they did Liberal. And so I don't want to overstate the collapse of that Liberal vote. But last thing I will say, one thing I got right, and I got this right not because of polling, but because of focus groups that we did. The other thing that was clear to me on election night is a thing that I heard during focus groups during the campaign for the CBC. And that was kind of an unexpected feeling of kind of warmth and relatability to Wab Kinew. And all of that sort of Tory messaging, he's got a criminal past, he's a rapper, he's soft on crime, defund the police, all of that stuff. It actually, I think maybe their own internal research missed a fundamental thing that was happening with voters, which was this sense of like, we relate to him. And I even heard this from rural kind of like, classically Tory voters, kind of like middle-aged guys and young guys in rural Manitoba who would say literally in focus groups that they did not relate to Heather Stephenson. She was too elite. She's too tuxedo. She didn't seem warm. She seemed out of touch. But Wab Kinew, oh yeah, I know he did some stuff when he was young. I drove drunk when I was young too, and I did some bad stuff. And we all deserve a second chance. And there was this really, I think, unexpected sense of like, we can relate to Wab Kinew and his kind of journey, his personal journey. And I think that momentum really, he played on that, and that carried him through, I think, during the campaign. And so this notion that like, can we elect an Indigenous guy? Can we elect a guy with a criminal past? That actually was his strength. It was the thing that made us understand exactly what his story was, his narrative, his values, where he came from, and be able to relate to that. Even people that didn't vote for him related to him better. And I thought that was a fascinating undercurrent of this election that I saw in focus groups, but I wasn't sure if it was going to translate into the electorate. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you all for your responses to that question. I really appreciate you taking the time to reflect back on your predictions and as well to give us an update in terms of really what happened with the election. So continuing now on to question 2, but this time I'd like to shake things up a bit and give Ms. Welch an opportunity to begin first. So with the first question, though, I'm going to ask here in a series of 2 questions. I just want you to take a few moments, just sort of conscious of time here. It's just past 7:30. And I'm going to ask what 2 things you believe made a difference to the election outcome. Now, I believe some of you have already spoken to that, but if you just briefly give me 2 points, and then we'll move through all the panelists and see what they have to say about that. So again, please, we'll begin with Ms. Welch, then we'll go to Dr. Coop, Ms. Brar, and then Dr. Adams. Thank you so much.
So I've already talked about one. I think one of the things that was critical to that NDP victory was the WOB story, and using that to have a tone of kind of hope, Obama, hopey, changey, positive. We are all in this together. You know, look at the journey I've been on. I'm going to take you on a journey, Manitobans. And so I think that was a tone thing that Manitobans really responded to. And then on the flip side to that, I think the other critical factor was the last sort of 2, well, okay, I'll say 1.5 things. The last sort of 10 days of the Tory campaign and how not so much negative it was, but how kind of weird it was. And I say this knowing that there are some Tories, Jasmine, even among us here. It was an inconsistent campaign. I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what they were trying to do. I didn't know what the message was. It was inconsistent with Heather's last 18 months. And then that last week of negativity, which I know we'll talk about more, and we've kind of dissected at length in the last couple of weeks. It not only, I think, didn't activate the voters they needed to activate, it forced people to pick a side, and they didn't want to be on that side. Even the people who had reservations about search the landfill, I don't know if it's going to work, I don't know if it's worth 184 million, but those guys seem kind of mean, and I don't want to. That's not a team I want to be on. And so I think part of it was a campaign that was just kind of ill-conceived and ill-focused, and then at the end turned on this dime of which side of this do you really want to be on, nice voter in Fort Richmond or Waverley. And I think those voters said, I don't think I want to be on that side. So two very fascinating approaches to tone that were, I think, pivotal in this campaign.
Yeah, so
Thank you very much, Dr. Coop.
Sorry about that. So yeah, like Mary Agnes, the first thing I thought that made a difference was WOB himself. In terms of leader influences, it wasn't going to be Heather Stephenson. Heather Stephenson has been around. She's been the premier for 2 years. Manitobans know her. Actually, we didn't see a whole lot of WOB for the last several years over COVID. And this is part of the reason, I think, why the polls tightened up as we got closer to the election campaign. When we're in the pandemic, everyone is mad at the government. Everyone is mad at the PCs. It's very easy to oppose the government, but it's a lot harder to transfer that over and say, okay, now am I going to support this other guy? Am I going to support this other team? And so I thought that a lot of the result would, well, maybe not a lot, but some of the result would turn on what happened with WOB. What kind of campaign was he going to run? And, you know, how were people going to respond to the Tory attacks that I think we all kind of knew were coming? And in the end, he ran a very disciplined, or remarkably disciplined campaign. I remember that moment in the debate when Heather asked him that first question about the landfill, and I thought, whoa, if he's gonna lose discipline, now is going to be the time. And he didn't. He stayed on message. But yeah, so like I grew up in BC, close to Alberta. When I was a kid, there was Ralph Klein was the premier of Alberta, and Gordon Campbell was the premier of British Columbia. And of course, Ralph Klein had to be forgiven for many, many things. And Gordon Campbell went to Hawaii and had his mugshot taken for drunk driving. Said he was sorry, went on to win 3 more elections. Canadians are more forgiving of their politicians than we give them credit for. And I think we saw more evidence of that in this campaign. Second thing I think is healthcare. We pretty soon we'll be able to say this decisively. I just think people had healthcare as the top of mind concern, and they voted with that in mind. And it's not that the Tories didn't try. And one of the things I think I made a bit of a mistake in the campaign when you talk about something like parental rights, that was an attempt to change the channel. People say, well, this is never going to work. And my response is, well, wait a second, look at the polling on this. Actually, like, there's widespread support for this idea of parental rights. People support what the Tories, like, I think 78% were okay with this. And that may well be true, but when you go to vote, you have to kind of you have to choose. And so, you know, what's more important to you, this new thing that's popped up in the campaign because the PCs gave it to us, or this long-standing concern about hospitals, about wait times that you've been hearing about for years and years? And I think ultimately it was that relentless NDP focus on healthcare and ongoing concern about healthcare that, in terms of policy, it probably made the difference.
Thank you, Dr. Coop. Ms. Brar, please.
Thank you. The first point I would like to touch base on is the NDP ran on a message of hope and the positive future of Manitoba, which includes the healthcare. Coming together in reconciliation to move forward on almost every portfolio, which was a very plus point for NDPs. And the PCs, everyone is aware, did the opposite, complete opposite. And they used fear tactics and negative campaigns. And it reminded me of Mr. Harper's last election at the federal level. The amount of negativity turned many swing voters away from Mr. Harper to Mr. Trudeau. And we saw something very similar in Manitoba just now, and where they went from former Premier Stephenson to Premier Canoe now. And last week of the campaign made a huge difference. And as Ms. Welch said, and I also said it in the last discussion as well, that I personally would we want to be part of the negative campaign, what was happening in the last week, which I was very, very disappointed. And the second thing I would quickly touch base was that while Mr. Canoe was out at the doors, on most of the seats they were focusing on, and which was like Fort Richmond, and Mrs. Stephenson did not have the presence at the doors consistently, and more or less vanished towards the end of the campaign again. This may have been planned by the campaign team or her own displeasure with the way the campaign was being run. But you could feel that in the air in the last week that things are going to change. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Dr. Adams, please.
Yes, so I agree with all the things being said, and Jasmine's comment about people voting for hope and rather than voting for negative. I would say that there are a couple of things. One is the campaign for the PCs. They went through these different phases, and somebody I know in Treasury Board has said we've never seen so much money go out the door as we have in the past year. And that was the budget 2023, prior to August, the money going out in rebate checks, a lot of money being spent on healthcare. We forget that, but on recruiting nurses, new expanded programs for training nurses and things like that, the settlement with the medical doctors in Manitoba. So, but no one would believe the PCs when they said, we're campaigning on this, on healthcare. Like people just weren't willing to listen to the PCs on this. But they positioned themselves as a centrist party in the springtime, even left of center in some ways, the amount of money going out the door. And I'm sure Brian Pollster was looking from Costa Rica or wherever in great shock at the amount of money being spent by a conservative government in Manitoba. And then, of course, the switch in as we got to the autumn, and then, of course, the negative tone of the final campaign. Now, Marnie Larkin, we all know that, the statement that they might have been smashed and taken down to 12 seats. We don't believe that. You look at, what seats you have to lose to get down to 12 seats. But regardless, I think this change over the 6 months, it was an about face by the PCs. And I think in many ways, that might have done them in. they might have made it a very close campaign, I think. And I know Royce and I disagree on this about conservative parties moving to the center. I believe that conservative parties do better when they move to the center. And Royce and I will have to do a thumb war over a cup of coffee one of these days on this. And he made this comment in the Free Press as well. And he might be right. But regardless, I think we saw 3 different phases in this progressive conservative campaign. And I think that was one of the major things. The other thing, and Mary Agnes mentioned this, the get out the vote. Brian Topp, the main campaign director for the NDP, the day after in the Free Press, he's saying the get out the vote was critical for them. And it might have been on many of those close things. And he said, they put more get out the vote on the advanced polls than before. And I thought, by gosh, didn't they know that before? Did we really need to come to 2023 that you need to get out the vote during the advanced polls? But it amazed me that that's what he was quoted saying in the Free Press. But what I think is he probably had a better database management system, a different set of volunteers, a different emphasis of where to put your resources. And but he says the get out the vote was a major factor in this election. And with so many close seats, it might have been a closer election. So I would say those 2 things in addition to what other people have said.
That's great. Well, thank you, Dr. Adams, and thank you everyone for answering that question. The final question I'm going to ask you, and for this time I'm going to shake it up a little bit. I'll begin with Dr. Coop, and then I'll go to Ms. Brar, and then Ms. Welch, and then Dr. Adams. The question is, and again, just aware of time here, because I want to spend some time at the end with some question and answers. So I'm going to ask if you could please keep your answers brief for 1 or 2 moments, please. And here's the question. What do you believe is the future of Manitoba's political parties? I know that seems like a big question. It might take a long time to answer, but please try to keep your answers brief to 1 or 2 moments, please. And again, we'll begin with Dr. Coop.
Yeah, I'll be quick. In the past, I said there's ideological diversity in the NDP. You see MLAs, they did indeed speak at things like defund the police rallies, and that kind of led me to think that this government might be difficult to manage. It could be a kind of fractious government. I'm not really sure I believe that anymore. I think the campaign was, as I've said, very disciplined. This is a party that, if you can be disciplined during a campaign, to some extent, you can be disciplined in government as well. And most of the MLAs in the NDP now the vast majority have been elected with Wabkin, who was their leader. And so, he has a lot of loyalty. So we saw in the last few days, there's a lot of goodwill that is going to carry that party forward. In the past, I thought this might have been a one-term government. I think that's probably less likely the case now. For the Tories, part of kind of being realistic about the nature of the defeat, it has important consequences for how the party assesses itself right now. The party did lose, but the fact that it wasn't a blowout means the party kind of has to be realistic about how much it changes. There's no reason for the party to kind of light its hair on fire in response to the results of this campaign. But yeah, being in the opposition after so many years in government is a very good opportunity to reassess and to rethink what kind of conservative alternative is this party going to provide in the future. And when you're in government, you're dealing with practical problems, and it gets hard to think in those kinds of broad terms. And now is the right time to do that. A lot of that, I think, is going to be a reflection of who the new leader of the party is. The leader is going to kind of put his or her stamp on the party. But we'll probably get questions about what that'll look like in light of the campaign, especially the stand firm aspect of it. So maybe I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brar.
Oops, sorry, I was muted. I think we're going to see a long NDP government with at least 2 back-to-back terms for sure. While the PCs does have to have some serious soul searching, and Manitoba is an outlier compared to the other Western provinces, with only one large city that decides the vote. so that more populist movements that were successful in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but will not be popular here in Manitoba. So either the parties realizes that it needs to balance and play closer to the center to win, as Mr. Adams said. And so no figures that would out in the political wilderness of the more social rule rights. And the leadership and who ultimates win will say a lot. I still believe Mr. Pollster's first election success was more so because of Mr. Salinger's disapproval rather than the popularity of particular PC policy. And then they couldn't turn that good. And we all have seen that well into substance after 2 terms, and this election proved that. So Liberal Party, I would say, have a lot of work to do, and they have a future in Manitoba in provincial? And also, how long will they take? How long will that take to reshape? And but the PCs, I think the future could be bright. Again, it will depend on the incoming leader. We'll see who that will be. But I personally think if we're looking at with all the rural ridings and few in the city, who would be the right person for the leader, I would say is Abi Khan. He's a good friend of mine, and I think he brings in a lot of experience, a lot of perspective. And I think he would be the perfect person to because he got a lot of experience within the city from the business, and I think he would be the right person. And if he is the leader, so that we might have a good future for PC parties. We can see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Welch, please.
I won't repeat what folks have said. I also think the NDP will probably be in government for a couple of terms, and the Liberals this might be close to the end for them, especially if the NDP remains so strong. But I think the really interesting kind of future question is exactly as Jasmine said, like the future of the Tories. And once we get over our obsession with who got in cabinet and who's a deputy minister and what's the new government going to look like, I think we will start to maybe focus a bit on the future of the Tories and what kind of party they want to be, and whether they'll kind of mirror this kind of populist rightward tilt that we're seeing in the federal party, or whether it will kind of turn a bit more to that red Tory Abi Khan kind of tradition. I think given the way things have gone, probably we're looking at a few years of that more populist rural focus, but I think that'll be the really interesting thing to watch, is how that party reforms itself, and like who's running it, who's in charge now. If everyone has disavowed this entire campaign, who is it? Who is running the show? I don't know anymore who's really running the show over there. So that's what I'll be watching.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And please, Dr. Adams, if you can conclude with your statement on that question. Thank you so much.
So if I could share my screen, I have 17 slides to show you on this question. But no, I want to focus on 2 things. Is the Progressive Conservative Party, Andrew Wenz of Leger had commented on Eric Grenier earlier in the week. He pointed out that many of these rural seats are new faces because there are safe seats, people who didn't run again for the PCs, and there's a lot of new faces in the rural side of the party. And as you know, the PCs have two wings, usually the rural side and the urban side. So we might see some real new folks pushing for leadership that we hadn't thought of coming up. So I agree with Jasmine. It'll be Abi Khan and 1 or 2 others, but we don't know who will come from the rural side of the party. And but similar to Brian Ransom versus Gary Filman and Sterling Lyon versus Sidney Spivak back in the 70s. So we might see an urban-rural battle over the leadership of the PCs. But the other thing that I'm going to be watching is we talked about the Liberals. Are they squeezed out? Is that the end of the Liberals in Manitoba? Well, I don't know, but I think also maybe a decline of the adventurous parties. The Keystone Party was did very, very poorly in this election. And also the Green Party really ran a incomplete campaign, or just a fragment party campaign. And so for now, we've got two main parties duking it out. And I don't know where it's going to go, but it's something to watch. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your comments to my questions, and also for keeping it brief. I really appreciate that. We're actually almost right on time here. So the last section for tonight's presentation is the question and answers. So at this point, I'd like to ask the participants here this evening if you have any questions to any of the panelists in general, or a specific panelist in particular. And I will answer the questions at this point and relay them to the panelists. And I see there's several questions in the chat, so I will begin. The first question, and again, this is open to any of the panelists to respond to, please. Who is the rising star for the NDP, whether it's a new MLA or a re-elected MLA, and also appointed as the Minister of a Department? Would anybody like to begin answering that, please?
Well, I'll take a stab. Just a quick one. Adrian Sala, I'm very interested to see. I mean, the new finance minister. That's the position that's the most critical, along with health. Asagara they've really been front and center in the campaign, and being given the health portfolio. That's a big burden, and something to see for them on that.
I think Tracy Schmidt, the new MLA for Rossmere, she's one of the few lawyers. I think she went to the Environment Ministry. I can't remember. She's a minister. I think I think she could be a rising star.
Anybody else like to comment on that question?
I would like to quickly comment on, I think the rising star is Nahanni Fontaine. I'm a big fan of her. It's the powerhouse and Minister of Families in Manitoba. And I'm really looking forward to what she brings to the table. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we have a few people here tonight who have also raised their hands. So I'm going to begin with the person who raised their hand first, and that's Christopher Classio.
I actually want to challenge some narratives that the panel has brought up about political parties. Now that Cindy's the only Liberal, I'm even told, in the west side of the country, if you exclude BC. So I'm really curious. None of the other provinces in the west have a Liberal party, and some of the other parties have combined with other smaller parties. I'm really curious if the Liberal brand is gone in the west, and whether Cindy Lamoureux, as maybe the future leader, might be able to change this demographic of the old boys club and an older generation being active in the political system. I'm really curious what some candidates' thoughts are on a third party.
Chris, thanks for giving me an excuse to talk about this. I'm writing something about it right now. Yeah, from the Manitoba-Ontario border, there's no provincial Liberal Party really to speak of. And isn't that a remarkable thing? The Liberal Party of Canada now exists as a kind of single level party that stands above society in half of the country, with no provincial affiliates to kind of allow them to sink their roots into society. I think it's a remarkable thing. It's going to have long-term consequences for the success of the federal Liberal Party, and I'm pretty sure that this century is not going to look like the last one, in part as a result of that.
Thank you, Dr. Coop. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, I just, hearken back to our pre-election gathering, and Royce had made the comment that in Western industrialized nations is the pattern of the center party disappearing in many countries. And we saw that in Manitoba in many ways. And of course, Cindy Lamoureux is an anomaly. I mean, she and her father have created this new election campaign handbook that everybody wants to get a hold of because it seems to work for them, but for nobody else. But Cindy Lamoureux just announced over the past 24 hours as the interim head of the Liberal Party. But anyway, I think it's part of the phenomena that was mentioned in the pre-election forum of Western countries just losing that center party.
Well, thank you. I have another question here that I'm just asking the panelists in general. No one mentioned the collapse of the Green Party vote until Chris at the very end. Is it probable that this vote went mostly to the NDP and that made a critical difference? Does anybody like to comment on that, please?
I might say some went to the NDP, but not all of it. Greens are a funny breed. They also can be quite conservative on other matters. And there really are so few Green voters that I don't know that they were the deciding factor in, very many places in this province. So I think to Chris's point, Chris Classio's kind of point earlier, that we are even more so in this two-party world now in Manitoba. The Greens are irrelevant, I would say, unfortunately, and the Liberals are soon to be or facing irrelevancy, I think. So yeah, the Greens, I think, weren't a huge factor.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I have another question here. How do you foresee the NDP working with, sorry, my screen just jumped. I apologize for that. And for some reason it jumped. Sorry about that. I'll try one more time here. Sorry. How do you foresee the NDP working with or facing opposition from other parties in the legislature, and what implications might this have on governance? Would you like to approach that question?
Well, I'll take a stab at it if I may. I think, as a result of this election, we have three worlds. We have the North, we have the city, and we have outside the city in the South. And I think that will feed into more of a sense of a combative feeling, a tone in the legislature. Not that the tone of the legislature has been very peaceful or pleasant over the past number of years, but I do think that within the assembly there will be more conflict between different interests that these MLAs represent in the assembly, and it will be difficult.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Anybody else want to reply to that?
I might just add that really, I think most of the political watchers are really watching what Kelvin Goertzen will do and what his role will be. Kelvin is such a fascinating animal, but he is masterful in question period and as an opposition kind of leader is the wrong word, but an opposition voice. And I don't think he keeps saying he doesn't want to be leader, and he would be a formidable opposition leader, I think, in the House and in Winnipeg. But so I'm wondering what role he'll play, and if it'll be a really front and center role, because he can almost single-handedly keep the NDP kind of on the straight and narrow.
Thank you so much. And just we have in the chat as well a compliment to all of you. Great analysis by everyone. And then a question following that: what is the top impediment besides leadership to the PCs coming back to challenge the NDP and the automatic two-term narrative?
Can we all just agree that, David, you should actually answer that question yourself? You probably have more insights than any of us do on that.
All right, I confess it was me, but I want to hear from you guys. It was good analysis. You guys were great. This is you're ticking all my boxes, as it were. But I want to hear from you. Sing for your supper, Mary Agnes.
Jasmine, you start.
You're on mute, Jasmine.
I'm actually going to leave this for experts.
I'd be interested in what you have to say too, David. But I mean, the question of the opposition leader is going to be important, but also recognizing that there's really only so much that the Tories can do in this situation. It's going to be up to NDP how well they perform, how consistently they perform. the best the party can do is, engage with these kinds of organizational questions, much like Brian Pollster did prior to him winning, and also these broader kind of philosophical questions about the party, what it stands for, the kind of alternative it's going to provide. Yeah, that's what I would think.
I would say also that the PCs have to restrain themselves from allowing somebody just to be the figurehead of the business interests and the PC insiders. We saw this with Stuart Murray kind of put in, and after Gary Filmon was defeated, and that didn't work very well. And to some extent, Heather Stephenson was put forward by the power brokers in the back of the party, and there was much dislike for that in the party, and Shelley Glover really got a lot of support as a result of that. So I think the PCs have to restrain themselves and allow a competitive leadership race to work out. And by golly, go back to the delegate conventions. Some of us who were at that leadership convention where Heather Stephenson was elected, it was like being at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon. It was the most Snoresville event. So we've got to go back to a proper competitive convention where we get some color and excitement.
But could I add two other things?
Mhm.
And I think these are like one of the impediments, and I saw this through the campaign, is that the sort of the Tories' endless capacity to miss opportunities.
Yeah.
And they had an opportunity to go after Wab Kinew for what one NDPer told me was the quote unquote kill shot, which is how the NDP handles the economy and inflation and cost of living and their trustworthiness on these economic questions. And this is top of mind for voters. It's just under healthcare, but it's a huge issue for voters, and the NDP are weak on it, and WAB is weak on it. And that was nowhere to be found in the campaign. But that might be an opportunity to sort of refocus their messaging. The other one is there's so many expectations for the NDP right now. They're going to solve homelessness. There's going to be safe injection sites tomorrow in Winnipeg. Poverty will be over. Healthcare will be fixed.
Yep.
And the NDP is really great at never staying in power by never expending quite as much political capital as they have, and quietly letting down a lot of lefties who have a lot of outsized expectations of them.
Yeah.
And staying in that center. And so I think the Tories, it's not so much the impediments as these opportunities that they have to point out where the NDP is really weak, and will be weak because they will let us down. They have in the past. And so those are some ill-formed thoughts, but I think it's less about impediments and more about, guys, there's a path here and you did not take it, and you often don't.
And part of what you're saying, Mary Agnes, though, is, and I think it's right, is to what extent does the government create the opportunity in how it operates? Governments lose elections, that sort of thing. And if Conservatives are so focused internally and have an identity crisis and get all caught up in this in terms of their leadership, which I think they potentially could be at, then they will continue to miss that opportunity. And then sort of the second term sort of emerges. I mean, whatever they do is their own business. But I do think the analysis that folks did and the kinds of things the ridings that were won and lost, they sort of tracked with what my list was and how the campaign was run and the strategy behind it, the way the leader operated. I think you guys all, just for what it's worth, I think your assessment and analysis was bang on. So just kudos to you. So.
I thought Chris's comments I liked your comments as well, Mary Agnes, but I thought Chris's comments were really interesting that, if the party in this leadership race, it feels like the last thing that they should do is close ranks around someone, like open it up, lower the requirements to vote for a leader, give the people a real say. And
what they're doing now, Royce, is I would offer is probably the opposite of that. I think they made a hasty choice by coalescing around an interim leader who I think will continue to drag them down. And and so the Kelvin Gertson piece, as you mentioned, Mary Agnes, he did a very good job. It's very effective in that interim piece point as premier. I think they need to turn the page, and they need to very careful about that coalescing around, which is which it happened. It was very much caucus and cabinet doing that with Stephenson, and a bunch of folks in the party said, just a second, and they sold memberships on that. So then the party rules on it. So I think you're absolutely right. So it's that internal stuff that could be a real. It will be a challenge. It's just a question of how much, in my view. Anyways, good stuff.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions still in the chat and someone's raised their hand. So I'm going to proceed to the next one, please. This is a compliment to all the panelists. Marvin says to everyone, thank you all for the wonderful insights. But to build on Christopher's question, what do you feel needs to happen to preserve a third major political party, whether it's the Liberals or the Greens in Manitoba and or in Canada? Or does the direction to two parties seem more inevitable now? I don't know if you want to answer that, Dr. Adams, or if you'd like somebody else to take that shot.
I'll leave it to others.
Okay, thank you.
Chris mentioned it, went back to our first panel. I made this comment that, increasingly in the democratic world, this is what politics looks like. Party of the center left, party of the center right. And we've kind of been deluded by the success of the Liberal Party of Canada, that having a dominant party of the center is the normal way things are. It actually isn't. It's a pretty rare thing in the world. And so any third party in running in Canadian elections in the provinces or the federal is going to have a very difficult time moving forward. And the provincial Liberal Party just kind of showed us how.
I would add that there are moments in which there are windows that get opened in which third parties can jump ahead. And of course, we all know about Sharon Carstairs in '88. And that was really the collapse of Howard Pawley's NDP. And no one wanted to support Pawley's NDP. And the same thing at the end of the Selinger government. The NDP was tired. They were having all those problems, the PST and all that, and the Liberals missed their opportunity for many reasons we won't get into, but that was a window that was opened, and the Liberals could have certainly surged, and they didn't. So it could be, the Liberals might come back if the federal Liberals stop having a brand that's disliked so much in Manitoba or in Winnipeg. And if the NDP completely discredit themselves, that would be an opportunity for the Liberals to come back, as long as they hang on to one or two seats and aren't completely out of it.
Well, thank you so much. We have someone's hand raised. Mark, or your hand's been raised for quite a while. Thank you for your patience. Can you please ask your question to the panelists?
Yeah, this question is, it's for all the panelists. Can anyone tell me, or if anybody knows and can share with the rest of everybody here, the occupation of all of the candidates for premier, and I guess to the best of your ability, MLAs in this last election? Who were they? What occupation did they have before they entered to become a candidate in this election? That's my question.
Mark, I couldn't tell you all of them, but I saw your comment there about, like, why are there so many lawyers in government and maybe not as many artists or scientists or philosophers? And I think that's a fair question. But I will say the NDP, the Tories, especially some of the rural members, tend to be, in terms of jobs, a little bit more diverse. There's farmers, there's business people from Brandon. It's not quite the lawyers and community activists that the NDP often has. But this cabinet, there's a teacher who I think is also one of the rising stars, perhaps, of Glenn Simard of the NDP. Has been very impressive in the last little bit. But I think it's a good political science question. Why so many lawyers who end up running for office, especially somebody like you who comes from a more community activist background? It's a good question.
Well, I would suggest the lawyers, they have more flexibility. They have law firms that allow them to take a leave of absence. Also, like if you become a lawyer, you're somebody who might have studied political science and you're interested in that stuff. You study constitutions and things like that. So you might have been an UMSU rep at the U of M. That sort of ladder of so someone who's an electrical engineer probably has better things to do in life than think about contracts and constitutions and things like that. But it's funny, each of the parties draws different types of occupations. Like the NDP has lawyers, but they also attract teachers. I don't know how many teachers are in the PCs. Maybe I'm wrong. I know you go back to the 1969, there are a lot of teachers elected for the NDP with Ed Schreier and almost no teachers in the other parties. So different parties also attract different types of individuals. But one thing is leading up to, because I was on the CBC election desk and I had a spreadsheet and I had all the occupations listed, and that was just by going to the website of each of the parties, and there's a biography of each candidate, and it tells you what their background is.
Yeah, Mark, I share your kind of concern with the dominance of lawyers and other occupational groups in politics. I think our politics suffers terribly from an absence, in particular, of working class people from blue collar backgrounds, and we benefit tremendously when those people are elected. So yeah, I agree with your concerns. I share them.
I would like to add to Mark's comment is I completely agree with you, Mark, is, we need more grassroots people running for the office. And I think the thing is, as you all may know, I ran in 2019. I'm a grassroots community worker. I'm not a business person. I'm not a lawyer. And it gets little, tough to, when you have a strong incumbent running, or strong the other candidate is very strong and their lawyer or business person, it sometimes gets really tough to compete in the campaign. And but I agree with you, we definitely need more people coming forward from grassroots levels. And I also want to take an opportunity to comment on David McLaughlin. David, we missed you in the province this election. I wish you were here. The results could have been different, because I have followed your campaign very closely last time.
Thank you. I am nonpartisan now. I am completely independent. I run a not-for-profit think tank on governance, but I am an interested observer, and I have a passion for all things Manitoba, and I have to tell you. So I'm, yeah.
Thank you.
Very close to that, and the great folks and great stuff. And I was delighted to have a chance there. So anyway, enough of the commercial. I'm in a new world, new zone. It's up to others.
And Jasmine, do we need more school trustees to run for office?
I think so.
Or become deputy ministers?
Trustees, more grassroots, volunteers, definitely.
Well, I think that concludes this evening's panel presentations. I don't see any more questions and no other hands raised. So I'd like to conclude that and just say, on behalf of the Centre for Social Science Research and Policy at the University of Manitoba, thank you so much for attending this evening's panel presentation. I really hope you found it very informative and interesting regarding Manitoba's October 3rd election. I also like to put a big thank you out to the panelists for this evening for coming back and sharing with us their perspectives on the election results. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise, as I said, on your opinion on this year's election. We will be following up this panel presentation with a evaluation that we're going to be sending out to all the participants via email. I really encourage you to take the time to complete the evaluation, send it back to us. We'd love to hear your comments and your feedback, and we really appreciate you attending this evening. And again, like I said, thank you so much to everybody for attending this evening and listening to the results of the Manitoba provincial election. Thank you, take care, and good night.
Well done. Hope to see you guys soon.
Take care. Bye.